Have you ever heard of the term nature versus nurture? Maybe in biology class or sociology class? Well, buckle up, because today's case sparked national debate over what many consider to be one of the most highly controversial sociological issues of all time. Hello, I'm Mack, and welcome to another episode of Killer Bites. So if you're unfamiliar, nature versus nurture is a long-standing debate in society and biology between factors that determine a human's fate. Is it our genetics that determine our fate? The coded DNA that we're born with and unable to change? Or is it our environment? The people, places, and general environment that we are around on a daily basis that determines our fate? To begin, let's focus on this tragic story that spans 3 generations. Familiar situations that end each in familiar fashion. A man bearing the name Weaver going to prison for murder. It was January 9th, 2002 in Oregon City when 12-year-old Ashley Pond disappeared. It was like any other chilly morning in Oregon as the bus made all of its usual stops. Ashley knew her bus route well. It was 10 minutes away from the apartment complex where she lived with her mother, but she never made it on the bus that morning. That night, her mother grew concerned when Ashley hadn't come home. She called Ashley's school and discovered that she had never arrived at school. Investigators searched high and low with minimal leads. Ashley was popular at school, was on the swim team and on the dance teams. Her mother was adamant that she did not run away. For 2 months, locals weren't sure what happened to Ashley. Was this another case of a rebellious teen looking to get away from their parents? Or had something much more nefarious happened? It wasn't clear until 2 months later when another girl from the same apartment complex went missing on her way to the same bus stop. Miranda Gaddis, a 13-year-old friend of Ashley Pond's, was never seen again. Investigators quickly realized that the 2 missing girls were connected in age, looks, and location. They began talking with neighbors and stumbled upon one with a complicated family history. April 6, 1963, Ward Weaver III was born into an environment of chaos. His father, Ward Weaver Jr., and his mother, Trish Weaver, were already known by the local police for their violent and volatile behavior. The first 4 years of young Ward Weaver's life, as well as the lives of his 3 siblings, were filled with a front row seat to their parents' constant drinking, use, and abusive fights. Trish Weaver left Jr. in 1967, citing the abuse in their relationship. While Jr. would occasionally see his children, he was soon drafted to the war in Vietnam, which would cause his visits to become even more sporadic and rare over the years. Trish would then remarry, attempting to give her children a more stable situation. Instead, by marrying Bob Boudreau, she introduced them to a similar situation of chaos and in turn changed Ward Weaver III forever. Moving to Eureka, California with their mother, the children were beaten regularly by Bob. He was a man who could become enraged at the smallest slight and drank so heavily during his marriage to Trish that she would regularly pack the kids in the car late at night and drive from bar to bar looking for her husband. Growing up in an abusive household, Ward still found ways to remain intrepid and childlike. He loved John Wayne movies and didn't complain when his Christmas gifts consisted of underwear and socks. It wasn't until a solo trip with Bob at the age of 12 that Ward's behavior and relationship with his mother took a serious turn. Bob was working as a longshoreman, someone who loads and unloads ships at port. He had a job a couple hours away in Sacramento, California, that would take weeks to complete. Trying to introduce Ward to the responsibilities of work, Trish agreed that he should travel with Bob. However, weeks later, Trish received a phone call from another dock worker informing her that Bob had been leaving Ward alone in a motel for hours on end as he bar hopped all day and night. Furious, she insisted that Bob and Ward return home. When they did, Trish claims that Ward was never the same. "That's the day I lost my son," Trish said. She would continue to blame that trip and Bob Boudreau's treatment of Ward for the change and development of Ward's uncontrollable rage. The family would move to Portland, Oregon for work, and Ward spent his high school time rebelling. He listened to AC/DC, smoked, and made his younger siblings' lives miserable. Ward would regularly find ways to torture his younger brother and sister. He would tie his half-brother Robert to a tree by a chain-link fence, separating their yard from a neighbor with an aggressive dog. Robert would be inches away from the jaws of an angry, snapping dog as Ward laughed and enjoyed the torment. Ward had a BB gun and would shoot his younger sister Tammy in the back. He found amusement in leaving large welts on the much younger girl's skin. Graduating from high school 6 months early, Ward eventually joined the U.S. Navy Reserve in 1981. Several months later, Ward received orders to ship out to the Philippines with the Navy as a cook. Not long after he left, a relative of Ward's came forward and accused Ward of raping her. However, after authorities questioned Ward and the girl, they deemed the investigation useless to pursue, given Ward's departure for a foreign country. This would begin an incredibly frustrating trend in Ward's life where a police investigation into an accusation would not be taken seriously. Ward returned from the Philippines a little over a year later after a less than honorable discharge. He returned to America with a woman, Maria Stout. They quickly moved to the Portland area and lived in the basement of Trish Weaver and Bob Boudreau. Ward's behavior continued to be unpredictable as he married Maria, and in the early years of the relationship, Maria was hospitalized after telling police that Ward had slapped her, pulled her hair, and banged her head on their bedpost. Yikes. While in the hospital, Ward's own mother, Trish, begged for Maria to press charges. Trish later stated, "I kept hoping someone would listen, someone would realize there was something wrong with this guy, someone would pick up the ball and do something." Maria would never press charges. It was during that same year that Ward's biological father, Ward Weaver Jr., had his most violent incident to date. Jr. was sentenced to death for the murders of 23-year-old Robert Radford and 18-year-old Barbara Lavoie. He had been high on and stimulant, which was most commonly used in World War II to prevent fatigue in soldiers. He picked up Robert and Barbara as hitchhikers before beating Robert with a lead pipe, raping Barbara over the course of multiple days on the road, and eventually strangling Barbara to death. Perhaps the most troubling fact about the murders was Jr.'s attempt to hide Barbara's body. Returning home to Oroville, California with her body, he began digging a hole with his 10-year-old son and Ward III's half-brother. He told the boy they were digging to look for a broken sewer pipe. However, once the boy went to school, Jr. put Barbara's body in the hole, filled it with concrete, and built a wooden porch on top of it. After his father's trial, Weaver III was frustrated that he had not been asked to speak as a character witness. He stated, "If I had been given the chance to speak on his behalf, I gladly would have. I love my father a lot and do not want him to be executed." During the investigation and trial for the murders, the scope of Jr.'s violent tendencies became very clear. This was an unpredictable and aggressive man who had been this way ever since he was a child. His defense team told stories of his own volatile upbringing. His father, Ward Weaver Sr., would regularly sexually assault his wife and other women he would bring home. Sr. would also rape his own daughter, as well as molest two of Jr.'s daughters. Jr.'s mother, Dorothy, regularly took nerve pills and would beat him with a belt. She told him that men should be castrated and forced him to sleep in the same bed as her until he was the age of 18. This included his wedding night. After his father's death sentence, Ward moved his family to Bakersfield in an attempt to reconnect with Jr. He would later tell authorities that we caught up on a lot of lost time. During the same time, his marriage to Maria continued to deteriorate and fall on hard times financially. With their son, Francis Weaver, the couple was taken in by family friends, the Ordonas. The Ordonas sold Filipino products at a weekly farmer's market, and Ward's experience in the Philippines came in handy, helping collect peanuts and desserts in the family van. While the Ordonas were aware of the couple's fighting, they offered a space in their home until the Weavers got back on their feet. After another night of heavy drinking, Ward was picked up by Jennifer Ordonas and her 15-year-old sister. Ward asked them to pull over for him to go to the bathroom, and afterwards hit Jennifer over the head with a cement block. Jennifer would later testify that Ward had a cold and neutral demeanor, as if he was sleepwalking through his violent actions, completely unaffected, possessed almost. Ward would be sentenced to 3 years in prison for the assault and would tell his probation officer that ultimately his biggest fear was ending up just like his father. When Ward was released from prison in 1988, those close to him hoped he would turn a new leaf to distance himself from his father's troubled past. Instead, the next 5 years were filled with continued domestic disputes with Maria, evictions, distribution of, and ultimately a restraining order from his wife. By 2001, Ward Weaver III was in a new relationship, living in a rental home in Oregon City with his youngest daughter, Mallory. It appeared that he had grown from his years of trouble. He was a member of the community and regularly hosted sleepovers for his daughter and her friends. Mallory went to Gardner Middle School and took the bus off of South Beaver Creek Road, where she would quickly befriend two other classmates, Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis. Ashley Pond was forced to grow up early. She was a rebellious child with a snarky attitude, and as more facts about her upbringing emerged, none could blame her. She lived with her mother in an apartment complex that was known to house unsavory characters. The complex was where the county frequently placed mentally ill and unstable patients for short-term housing, which would lead to a plethora of potential suspects. When officers first heard from Ashley's mother that she was missing, their first reaction was that the soon-to-be teenager was acting out, run away from home for attention, skipping school as kids sometimes do. Ashley's mother was adamant that that was not what happened. She had been excited for a dance recital that night. None of her clothes or belongings were missing from her bedroom. It wasn't until a week without any contact from Ashley that the reality began to hit investigators. Ashley Pond had been abducted. The investigation quickly came back with a jarring discovery: a death of potential suspects, not just within the town, but within a 1-mile radius of Ashley's route from the apartment to her bus stop. One of the suspects was her own father, who had been convicted of sexually assaulting Ashley during one of her visits. In fact, there was over 90 registered sex offenders living within the 1-mile area of town near Ashley. Time out, hold on. 90 offenders? That is shocking and terrifying, but it really puts into perspective how dangerous that 10-minute walk to the bus every morning could become. The town's police department was overwhelmed with possibilities and underwhelmed by the evidence. There was no sign of Ashley, nothing left behind, and no signs of where she went. For months, the town stayed optimistic that perhaps she really had run away. It wasn't until 2 months later that it became very clear that Oregon City had a very serious problem. Miranda Gaddis had a similar story to Ashley Pond, and that wasn't where the similarities ended. Like Ashley, Miranda attended the same middle school, lived in the same apartment complex with her mother, had brown hair, brown eyes, and was part of the dance team. The two were friends, spending weekends, having sleepovers, and walking home together frequently. Miranda had even been interviewed in the weeks that followed Ashley's disappearance, saying, "It's really hard to believe that happened to one of your friends or something. It's just really different and really sad." Miranda had also experienced inappropriate behavior early on. Her stepfather had molested her at a young age, and her biological father had also been convicted of sexually assaulting 2 minors. Investigators now knew that they had someone who was abducting girls and called in over 60 FBI officials to assist with the case. The lack of evidence continued to confound those who worked the case. How were these 2 girls that were so well known in town able to just completely disappear off the map without a trace? A theory began to prevail. Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis must have known their abductor to not have put up any kind of struggle. As family members grew frustrated with the lack of progress in the case, they became intimately involved in the investigation. An extended family member of Ashley Pond's family, Linda O'Neill, began to do her own investigation. A licensed private investigator, Linda, was called to action saying, "Well, the FBI would say, we have no suspects, we have no crime scene, and we have no clues." So it appeared that they needed a little help. Linda shared the FBI's belief that Ashley and Miranda knew their attacker and asked around town where the girls liked to hang out. It was then that she unearthed a police complaint from a year before. Concerned, Linda began to do more digging on male members of the community that Ashley and Miranda had interacted with. Linda researched their neighbor, Ward Weaver, and quickly discovered he was on death row. Confused, she realized that it was Ward Weaver Jr. and that the Ward Weaver in Oregon City was the son of a convicted murderer. But certainly a father's misdeeds weren't enough to make someone a suspect. This was someone who frequently hosted sleepovers and who had even taken Ashley Pond in and let her live with the family during one of her mother's most tumultuous times. It was then that Linda discovered a police report from August of 2001 where Ashley Pond told authorities that while having a sleepover at Mallory Weaver's house, Ward Weaver had sexually molested her. Police would say that they investigated those claims, but no charges were ever filed. Okay, this is absolutely infuriating. I'm not even related to any of these victims, and I can't even handle seeing all the missteps that at the hands of the police. I can only imagine how their families felt. Investigators had been through the Weavers' neighborhood with dogs to see if there was any trace of Ashley or Miranda. Even going to Ward's residence specifically, the dogs picked up nothing. Linda continued to research Ward, interviewing his past wives and girlfriends, his daughter's friends, and anyone who had something to say about him. There was the teacher who saw Ward drop off Ashley and pull her in for a passionate kiss on the lips. There was a family friend who alleged that Ashley would sleep in Ward's bed with him anytime she slept over. And finally, there was an ex-girlfriend of Ward's who told Linda O'Neill that he was angry with Miranda Gaddis because she had been telling other girls in the neighborhood to avoid the Weaver house because of his inappropriate behavior. Linda combed through past news reports and even found a quote that Ward had given a paper on his thoughts about Ashley's disappearance, saying, "That little girl took off," and I wholeheartedly believe that. The case was starting to get national attention. 2 missing girls from the same neighborhood, no evidence or leads. The town was held hostage by fear. The bus route was switched to pick up children from their individual homes to ensure no child walked alone. Parents grew paranoid. More and more investigators flocked to Oregon City to try and assist the FBI, much to the annoyance of the police. One of these private investigators was Harry Oakes. Oakes knew his reputation within police departments. He was known as a pest who the authorities hated to work with. Oakes owned a for-profit search and rescue center using his own sniffing dogs on cases. Oakes came to town on his own accord, waiving his fee and hoping to find out what happened to these innocent girls. With the help of one of his dogs and a piece of Ashley's clothing, Oakes stumbled upon a series of unusual clues. Starting at the apartment complex, the dog had Ashley's scent. It led Oakes down the path to the bus stop until finally up to Ward Weaver III's house. Unsure how he would react, Oakes knocked on Weaver's door and asked if his dog could sniff the property. Weaver's demeanor was one of someone who had nothing to hide. He told Oakes that the authorities had already brought 7 different search teams through the property and found nothing. Oakes entered the property with the dog, who still had the scent of Ashley Pond. The dog alerted Oakes that her scent was in the hallway before heading outside. Outside, Oakes noticed a fresh concrete slab in the backyard. The dog quickly headed that way. Oakes would later say, where the slab met with the grass, the dirt where they came together, my dog was smelling Ashley's scent coming out of there. Right. Because nothing says innocent like a fresh slab of cement in your yard when 2 girls have gone missing. Oakes thanked Weaver for his time and quickly filed a report to the Oregon City Police Department and FBI investigators. It was March 20th, 2002, 2 weeks after Miranda had disappeared. His independent findings and report were completely ignored by the authorities. It was then that Linda O'Neill, looking for a way to officially connect Ward Weavers to the disappearances, came across Harry Oakes' report. One bit stood out the most from his investigation: the freshly laid slab of concrete. Through her research into Ward Weaver and his father on death row, an important part of the early 1980s investigation was hard to forget. When Junior had forced his 10-year-old son to help him dig a hole where he would bury a woman's body before covering her with a concrete slab and building a porch over her remains, Linda was disturbed by the similarities. Was Ward Weaver III mimicking his own father's attempt to hide the body of an innocent woman he had murdered in cold blood? By June of 2002, the investigation continued to gain notoriety. The story was featured in People magazine, and the authorities didn't seem to have a prime suspect, but rather a range of unsavory characters that could potentially fit the bill as the culprit. It was then, after months of investigating Ward, that Linda O'Neill met him face to face. Linda returned home to her son working on his car in the driveway with a strange man standing next to him. Linda quickly realized that this was Ward Weaver III. Uncomfortable with his presence, Linda attempted to bring her son inside with her. It was then that Ward turned to Linda and said, "Kids are so naive, aren't they?" To which Linda responded, "Mr. Weaver, I don't think my family is any of your business." Ward thought for a moment before responding, "Miss O'Neill, that's what I came here to tell you." From then on, Linda O'Neill would carry a loaded gun in her purse, and honestly, you can't really blame her, because that is super creepy. It was after this incident and growing frustrated at the FBI's lack of interest in Ward as a suspect that Linda called the Portland Tribune and got in contact with reporter Jim Redden. Jim would interview Ward at his house, giving him a chance to clear his name. Jim would later state that he really seemed like a very normal kind of guy. He was coming across to me as sort of honest and candid. The more he talked, the more nervous he got, and that's when he said, "I'm the FBI's prime suspect." The interview with the Portland Tribune would be the first time that the general public would hear the name Ward Weaver III, especially as the self-proclaimed prime suspect in the case. Other reporters descended on Oregon City to interview Ward. He took them interview after interview, showing different reporters the grounds around his house and arguing that the only reason he was a suspect was because his father's crimes over 2 decades earlier. Ward would defend his actions with Ashley by saying he was only trying to help her out of the difficult family situation that she was in. He even added, she's better off hiding out wherever she's found a place to live. Weeks later, the FBI conducted a huge raid on a suspect in the case, but it wasn't Ward. It was a neighbor of both girls who had his own checkered past and failed the polygraph test. A search warrant was executed as investigators sifted through his home, his car, and all of his personal belongings. No additional evidence was found. Linda was adamant about the FBI was wasting time by looking at suspects other than Ward Weaver III. By August of 2002, 7 months after Ashley Pond's disappearance, Ward grew restless. The rumors swirling around town were hurting his reputation, and the media attention was grueling. He began to tell friends and family that he would be leaving Oregon City either for Idaho or Mexico. He packed up his home and all of his belongings, ready to move. That was until the rage he had been able to keep hidden from the world for the last 15 years returned. Ward's son from his first marriage to Maria Stout, Francis, was now 19 years old. He was local to Oregon City and occasionally stayed with his father. Francis would bring his girlfriend Randy Oneida and their young child with them as well. Randy was friendly with Ward, familiar with him. It wasn't until August 13, 2002 that everything had changed. Ward was driving Randy back to his house, which was mostly empty and packed up. Recalling the incident, Randy would mention it wasn't until they got inside that he was possessed. It wasn't him. It looked like Satan was inside of him. But the second he stood up off of me, his face went back to normal. Ward forced himself on his son's girlfriend, ripping off her clothes and raping her. She would eventually get him off of her and run out of the house naked. Able to flag down a car nearby, she was safe. Within hours of the attack, Ward Weaver III was arrested, booked, and in jail. While Ward sat in a jail cell, Francis came to the authorities with more information about his father. Francis told him that Ward had confessed to killing both Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis. 10 days later, with a search warrant in hand, the authorities were able to search the Weaver property and dig up the cement that had been there since the early spring. They would find the body of Ashley Pond underneath the cement and the remains of Miranda Gaddis in a cardboard box in Ward's shed. Ward Weaver III had indeed disposed of Ashley's body the same way his father, Ward Weaver Jr., had done with Robert Radford and Barbara Lavoie 20 years earlier. There was outrage from the Oregon City residents that it had taken so long to search the property, and this outrage was very much deserved. You had an accusation from one of the missing girls, past crimes, and a suspicious fresh patch of concrete outside the house. In particular, Linda O'Neill's information was brought to light again. The FBI's special agent in charge said that there was only one documented conversation between Laura O'Neill and the FBI. He said the tip was a psychic tip, and that is the only documented contact this investigation had with the author. Ward Weaver III was indicted and charged with 6 counts of aggravated murder and various counts of rape and sexual abuse. One can only reflect on what Ward told his probation officer in 1988 as he was released from prison, that his biggest fear was ending up on death row like his father, Ward Weaver Jr. What went so wrong in the 15 years since then that he had now faced the exact same predicament, with a case that shared so many of the same details? Perhaps it was the thought of ending up on death row just like his father that convinced Ward to stop proclaiming himself innocent and instead accept a plea bargain. Ward Weaver III would plead guilty to 2 charges and no contest to the rest in order to avoid the death penalty. Instead, he was given 2 life sentences in prison without parole. After having his father arrested for the rape of his girlfriend, Francis Weaver was clearly affected by his family's long list of atrocities. It was through DNA testing related to Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis' murder that Francis received more shocking news. He was not Ward Weaver III's biological son. Both Francis and Ward were under the impression that they were father and son, but the DNA proved that Francis had a different father. Francis's mother, Maria Stout, would later say that she could not be sure who his father was, but it was most likely between a deceased Marine or a Navy officer she had met years before. Francis was 19 years old when his father went to prison. Having already grown up around his incredibly volatile temper and the knowledge that his grandfather was a convicted murderer on death row, suddenly Francis knew nothing. If he wasn't a Weaver by blood, would he still be cursed to make the same mistakes as his father and his father's father? By 2002, Francis had already had a checkered past of his own with the law. And in 1999, he had been charged with aggravated assault after shooting a rifle into a truck full of teens, injuring his best friend. He served several weeks in a juvenile detention facility before returning home. Francis continued to rack up his own rap sheet of small crimes, dealing assault, robbery, all before the ages of 25. Things took a turn for the worse in 2014 when Francis Ward was arrested and charged with murder in Canby, Oregon. Reported as a deal gone bad, Francis and 3 others were accused of attempting to rob a man of 15 pounds. Francis was charged with providing the weapon and helping plan the robbery. Francis would be convicted and sentenced to life in prison. However, in September of 2020, the Oregon Supreme Court overturned that murder conviction after discovering that the plea bargain agreement struck with a co-defendant by prosecutors violated Francis Weaver's constitutional rights. Although still in prison, Francis is scheduled for a new trial soon to determine his involvement in the murder. With Francis Weaver behind bars, it put another twist in the lineage of Weaver men with dark pasts. What was it about these men that made them commit such atrocities? Did Ward Weaver III ever have a chance to lead a successful life? Or was he doomed the second he shared the name and DNA of Ward Weaver Jr.? If so, why didn't any of his other siblings fall victim to the same fate? And why would his mother ultimately blame the treatment from his stepfather for his twisted behavior? What would Ward Weaver III's life look like if he had been raised in a more stable situation? What would have been different had investigators decided to pursue charges before Ward Weaver III went to the Philippines to serve in the Navy? Or Ashley Pond's claim months before she was murdered that Ward Weaver III had raped her? Would he have still gone on to hurt more women? One of the remaining mysteries about the Weaver family is if the stories of their murders have finished being written. Ron Schumacher, who prosecuted Ward Weaver Jr. in 1984, would say no. Schumacher now details his conversations with Jr., where he offered in exchange for a plea deal to keep him off death row. He would show investigators the remains of 26 other victims. Although Schumacher declined, adamant that the prosecution should focus on the death penalty, he remains confident that Jr. is connected to dozens of other murders. Jr.'s truck logs from his years of driving match the timelines of numerous missing persons and murders from that time. Now, while Ron Schumacher doesn't believe he is guilty of all of them, the evidence suggests that there are other unsolved cases with his involvement. And after everything that we've learned, it's not hard to believe that Jr. could be responsible for a great many number of heinous acts. While it's hard to come up with definitive answers about what is to blame for the Weavers' violent tendencies, what was most interesting to me was it was clear that the explosive home life each grew up with only compounded the issues under the surface. Each boy was forced to experience horrific traumas firsthand and most likely damaged their brain chemistry in the process. Did they already have a predisposition to inflict pain, enjoy torturing other living things, or was that the behavior learned from the men before them? We here at Killer Bites think this story is an important testimonial to the importance of protecting men, women, children, and any of those who need help getting out of these abusive situations. And at this time, we would like to let all of our viewers know that if they know anyone that you believe is being abused, manipulated, hurt, and in danger, that there are resources to help. If you believe that there are children in harm's way, please visit childcare.gov for more information on your specific state's process. If someone you know is in an abusive relationship, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233. Once again, thanks for watching. I'm Mack, and this is Killer Bites.